there are thrones built on conquest and thrones built on fear. Ainz Ooal Gown's throne was built on something far more absolute: inevitability. He sat within the great tomb of Nazarick, surrounded by servants who loved him with fanatical devotion, commanding powers that bent reality itself. Every floor of his domain pulsed with ancient magic. Every guardian awaited his command with perfect loyalty. He had crushed nations, rewritten kingdoms, and established an empire where his word was law. Yet even in this perfection, Ainz sensed something fractured, a tremor beyond the edges of his understanding. He was not a god.
He knew this.
He was an undead overlord piloting a body of absolute power, while the mind within remained painfully, tragically human. Or what remained of human. Satoru Suzuki, the salaryman who once existed, had long ago faded into the role he now played. Ainz Ooal Gown was all that remained, a performance so complete it had become truth. Tonight, that truth would shatter. Demiurge had proposed a ritual. An expansion of Nazarick's influence, a way to extend their reach into realms yet unconquered. The preparations had been meticulous. Runes carved from materials harvested across a dozen subjugated territories. Incantations drawn from forgotten grimoires. Albedo oversaw every detail with her obsessive precision. Shaltir provided the necessary magical catalysts.
Cosida secured the perimeter. Nothing was left to chance.
Ainz approved the ritual not because he understood it, though he could never admit that, but because his guardians expected decisiveness.
A supreme being does not hesitate.
A supreme being does not question. So he stood at the ritual's center, staff in hand, and allowed the magic to unfold. The air grew dense. Reality rippled like water disturbed by an unseen hand. The runes ignited with light that hurt to perceive, not bright, but wrong, as though the colors themselves violated some fundamental law.
Ainz felt the pull immediately. Not a summoning, not a teleportation.
Something deep. Something that reached past the layers of his being and touched the architecture of existence itself.
Then the fracture opened. It was not an explosion. It was not violent.
It was precise, a surgical incision through the fabric of worlds. Ainz saw beyond the veil for a single terrible moment. He saw currents of madness and emotion given form. He saw colors that screamed. He saw hunger without mouth, rage without body, despair without end. He saw the warp. And the warp saw him. The ritual did not fail.
It succeeded far beyond its design.
It resonated with something ancient and malevolent, something that had been clawing at the boundaries of 1,000 realities for eternity. The warp storm reached across the void between universes and seized the thread of magic Nazarick had unwittingly offered.
Ainz did not panic.
Panic required a heart, and his had long since ceased beating. He analyzed. The pull was absolute. Resistance was impossible. His guardian screamed, his Albedo's voice shattered with anguish, Demiurge's with calculation even in crisis. But the distance between them grew infinite in an instant. Nazarick remained.
Ainz did not.
He was pulled through the wound in reality, dragged across the space between worlds. Fragments of his power, echoes of Nazarick's influence, came with him, not the tomb itself, but imprints, shadows, potentialities. He tumbled through impossible geometries, past architectures of thought and nightmare, until finally he stopped.
Not fell.
Stopped. He floated in a realm without ground, without sky, without natural law. Around him, the Imperium churned an ocean of souls and madness, where emotion crystallized into predatory intelligence. Demons circled at the edges of perception, curious and hungry. Warp currents twisted around him like serpents testing prey. Ainz Ooal Gown, supreme overlord of Nazarick, ruler of the Sorcerer kingdom, stood alone in hell itself. And he did what he always did. He observed. His empty eye sockets scanned the impossible landscape. His mind, no longer bound by flesh, yet still methodical, began cataloging variables.
Threat assessment, resource evaluation, strategic position.
He did not know where he was. He did not know how to return. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would not kneel.
Not to gods.
Not to chaos. Not to despair. The warp pressed against him, trying to read him, to taste his emotions, to feed on his fear. But Ainz Ooal Gown had no blood to quicken, no breath to catch, no racing pulse to betray terror. He was undeath given will. Cold, absolute, unyielding. For the first time in eternity, the warp encountered something it could not digest. A presence that rejected its fundamental nature. Perfect tyranny without emotion. Perfect power without soul. And in the depths of that howling madness, Ainz Ooal Gown began to plan. The first demon came with confidence. It manifested as hunger given Thing of too many mouths and impossible angles, born from the despair of a billion dying souls. It had consumed gods and mortals alike. It had tasted every flavor of fear. Now it sought this strange, silent presence that drifted through the Imperium like a stone in a river of screaming thought. The demon lunged. Ainz raised one skeletal hand. Grasp heart. The words were spoken without voice, transmitted through pure magical will. The spell activated instantly a 9th-tier incantation designed to crush a target's vital organ and inflict instant death. In Yggdrasil, it had been a reliable opener, effective against most enemies who lacked death immunity. Here, in the warp, it should not have worked. Demons were not alive. They had no hearts, no organs, no biology. They were emotion and malice crystallized into temporary form, bound to the Imperium's tides. Death was meaningless to them. Banishment was temporary. True destruction required either overwhelming psychic force or the Emperor's own divine fire. The demon vanished. Not banished. Not dispersed back into warp stuff to reform later. Erased. The magic that destroyed it was alien to this reality, powered not by faith, not by psychic energy, not by the warp's own currents. It was external. Absolute. A law from a different universe imposed upon this one with surgical precision. The demon's essence tried to retreat, to dissolve and return to its patron, but there was nothing to return. The spell had negated its existence retroactively. Silence rippled through the Imperium. Then came the horde. Dozens of demons manifested simultaneously, bloodletters hungry for rage, plague-bearers spreading entropy, horrors cackling with impossible knowledge, demonettes offering exquisite torment. They swarmed from every direction, a tidal wave of chaos determined to drown this anomaly. Ainz did not move. Shubnigurat. Dark fog erupted from his position, expanding in all directions. Within it, shapes formed, massive, bleeding horrors born from Yggdrasil's most powerful summoning spell. The dark young of Shubnigurat, entities of crushing strength and relentless hunger, tore into the demon horde with mindless efficiency. The warp recoiled. These were not demons. They were not warp-born. They existed independent of emotion, independent of the Imperium's rules. They killed without rage, without pleasure, without purpose beyond their summoner's will. Each demon they destroyed stayed destroyed, no reformation, no respite, no eternal return. For the first time in millions of years, the warp was losing ground. Ainz continued his assessment. He cast Time Stop. Experimentally, the world froze, including the currents of the warp itself. Impossible, yet it worked. He cast Reality / cutting through layers of Imperium as though severing fabric. He raised skeletal hands and tested divination spells, necromancy, elemental magic, buffs, debuffs. Everything functioned. His magic operated on principles entirely separate from this universe's physics. No psychic resonance, no warp connection, no emotional fuel. His power was a closed system, self-sustaining, drawing from sources this galaxy had never encountered. And then they noticed. 4 presences turned their attention toward him. Vast beyond comprehension, ancient beyond measure. The chaos gods themselves, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, focused their infinite malice on this impossible intruder. Tzeentch, the architect of fate who saw every possible future, could not predict Ainz's next action. The Sorcerer King's decisions were made by a mind from another reality, operating on logic systems outside the Great Game's rules. Nurgle, the Lord of Decay who corrupted all living things, found no purchase. Ainz was already dead permanently, fundamentally. There was no flesh to rot, no soul to corrupt, no hope to crush into despair. Khorne, the blood god who fed on rage and combat, sensed no fury.
Ainz fought with clinical detachment.
His kills were calculations, not expressions of violence. There was no passion to harvest, no glory to claim.
Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure who thrived on desire and excess, encountered perfect emptiness.
Ainz wanted nothing beyond survival in return. His emotional suppression stripped away even the potential for temptation. The Chaos Gods whispered among themselves an act so rare it sent tremors through the warp. An accord formed, fragile and temporary. This thing could not be allowed to exist. Greater demons manifested bloodthirsters, great unclean ones, lords of change, keepers of secrets. Champions of chaos, each powerful enough to level worlds. They converged on Ainz's position with singular purpose.
Ainz assessed the threat level and made a decision. The goal of all life is death.
The ultimate skill activated a spell that bypassed all immunities, all resistances, all defenses. It transformed the next cast spell into an absolute death sentence, effective even against entities normally immune to mortality.
Ainz followed with Cry of the Banshee.
The shriek expanded outward in a perfect sphere. Every greater demon within range fell.
Not defeated, not banished, dead.
Truly, finally, impossibly dead. Their essence did not return to their gods. Their names were struck from the warp's memory.
They simply ceased.
The Imperium screamed. For the first time since the war in heaven, something had wounded chaos itself. Ainz Ooal Gown floated in the sudden stillness, surrounded by the dissolving remnants of entities that should have been immortal.
He felt no satisfaction, no pride, only cold assessment. This place was hostile. Its inhabitants were aggressive.
But they were not invincible.
They could be studied, analyzed, defeated,
and perhaps exploited. He began moving through the warp, not aimlessly, but with purpose. Somewhere in this madness there had to be an exit, a way back to reality, a door to the material universe. He would find it, and whatever waited on the other side would learn what true tyranny looked like. The world was called Hydra Cordatus. It had been a mining colony once, productive and loyal, tithing ore to the Imperium's endless forges.
Now it burned.
Chaos cultists had risen from within, workers turned traitor, seduced by promises of freedom from the God Emperor's oppressive rule. They had summoned demons. They had opened a warp rift. Hundreds of thousands died in the initial uprising. The survivors huddled behind failing walls, waiting for rescue that would arrive too late. The Imperial Guard fought with courage born of desperation. Commissars executed deserters to maintain morale. Priests chanted litanies to shield minds from corruption. Artillery pounded corrupted districts without CC. But the tide was inevitable.
Chaos always won in the end.
Then the sky tore open.
Not a warp rift, something else.
A precise wound in reality, clinical and controlled. Through it stepped a figure that froze both sides in confusion. A skeleton in ornate robes, crowned with dark grandeur, carrying a staff that pulsed with alien power. Ainz Ooal Gown had found his exit from the warp and stumbled onto a battlefield he did not understand.
He assessed immediately. Two forces in conflict.
One clearly corrupted by the warp energies he had just escaped. The other, desperate and exhausted, defending fortified positions. The choice was tactical, not moral. He had no love for either side, but chaos represented a known threat. The cultists attacked first. They saw an obvious demon, a servant of their dark gods. They charged with zealot fury, screaming prayers to the ruinous powers. Dozens rushed forward with improvised weapons and corrupted flesh.
Ainz raised his hand. Fallen down.
A pillar of holy light descended from the heavens, radiant, purifying, absolute. It struck the charging cultists like divine judgment. Their bodies disintegrated.
Their screams were silent.
The ground itself was scoured clean. leaving only glass where earth had been. The Imperial forces watched in stunned silence. Ainz continued forward, unbothered. More cultists emerged, some riding in corrupted vehicles, others mutated beyond recognition. Demons manifested at the rift's edge, howling with recognition. This was the one who had wounded the warp itself. Summon undead 10th tier. The spell activated across a wide area. Every corpse on the battlefield, Imperial, cultist, civilian, rose as undead servants. Not shambling zombies, but death knights, armored warriors wielding blade and spell with terrifying efficiency. They formed ranks around Ainz without command, an instant army loyal beyond death. The Chaos forces hesitated. This was not how demons behaved. This was not warp corruption. This was something new, something wrong. Ainz walked through the chaos methodically. When a demon prince descended to challenge him personally, he stopped time with a gesture, walked to the frozen entity, and cast true death at point-blank range. The demon prince collapsed mid-roar, its immortal essence severed permanently. When corrupted tanks advanced, he raised walls of bone that absorbed their fire, then collapsed those walls onto the vehicles, crushing them like insects. When cultists attempted psychic attacks, his passive immunity simply negated them. His undead nature rendered him immune to mind control, fear, madness, corruption. The Imperial Guard watched a single entity accomplish in minutes what would have taken them weeks of brutal attrition. Commissar Helena Vorst stood on the wall, binoculars trembling in her hands. She had fought chaos for 20 years. She had seen demon incursions, traitor uprisings, Xenos raids. She understood the galaxy's cruelty. But that thing just killed a demon prince, her aide whispered. Permanently, I saw, Helena replied, her voice hollow. It's raising our dead, that's heresy, that's I know what it is, Helena interrupted. But it's winning. Ainz reached the warp rift itself, a tier in reality leaking madness and corruption. He studied it with detached curiosity. In his world, such things could be sealed with appropriate magic. Here, the energy signature was different, but the principle seemed similar. He began casting. Multiple spells layered in sequence: warding, binding, negation, sealing. The rift resisted, pulsing with the warp's fury. Demons clawed at the edges, desperate to keep their doorway open. Ainz simply increased the spell's power, drawing on his massive mana reserves. The rift shuddered, shrunk, screamed, and closed. Total silence fell across the battlefield. The corrupted forces, cut off from warp reinforcement, collapsed into confusion. The undead army Ainz had raised systematically hunted down the survivors with mechanical efficiency. No rage, no glory, just extermination. Within an hour, Hydra Cordatus was secure. Ainz stood at the battlefield's center, surrounded by his undead servants, examining the architecture of the city's ruins. This world's technology was crude compared to Nazarik's magic, but functional. Combustion engines, projectile weapons, radio communication. The Imperial forces had not moved. Thousands of soldiers stood frozen, unsure whether they had been saved or conquered. Commissar Vorst made the decision. Someone had to. She descended from the wall, flanked by 2 guards, and approached the skeletal figure. Every instinct screamed that this was suicide. Every training session had taught her to purge the Xenos, the mutant, the heretic without mercy. But this thing had just saved her world. She stopped 10 meters away and saluted crisply. I am Commissar Helena Vorst, 47th Hydran Regulars. On behalf of the God Emperor and the Imperium of Man, I thank you for your intervention. Ainz turned to face her. Empty eye sockets regarded her with alien intelligence. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of emotion. Your gratitude is noted. I am Ainz Ooal Gown. I require information regarding this world, its political structures, and the nature of the hostile forces I just eliminated. Helena's blood ran cold. Not from fear. From realization. This entity had not saved them. It had simply cleaned up a mess that offended its sense of order. It spoke as a ruler speaks to subjects, as a general speaks to subordinates. It expected compliance not through worship or terror, but through the simple assumption that obedience was natural. "I will relay your questions to my commanding officers," Helena managed.
Ainz nodded once.
"See that you do. I have no interest in conflict with your people unless they prove hostile. However, I will not tolerate interference with my operations."
Operations, not requests, not negotiations.
Operations. Helena saluted again, turned, and walked back to her lines. Behind her, the undead army stood in perfect formation, awaiting their master's command. Across the Vox network, desperate transmissions began flooding toward the sector's inquisitorial fortress. A new power had entered the Imperium, and nobody knew if it was salvation or damnation. The Inquisition arrived within 3 days. They came with fury and suspicion, bearing seals that granted them authority over life and death. Inquisitor Cassius Vex led the investigation personally, a man who had purged 17 worlds of corruption and never once questioned his mandate. He stepped onto Hydra Cordatus expecting to find chaos taint, heretical contamination, evidence justifying immediate exterminatus. Instead, he found order. The city had been rebuilt, not restored to its previous state, but reorganized with ruthless efficiency. Undead laborers worked ceaselessly, clearing rubble, repairing infrastructure, distributing supplies. Living citizens walked among them, uncertain but alive. Casualty rates had dropped to 0. Crime had ceased entirely, not through enforcement, but through the simple presence of tireless watchers who never slept. Vex's retinue included a senior psyker, a tech priest of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and a sister of battle as bodyguard. They approached the central plaza where Ainz had established his temporary seat of authority. The skeleton sat on a throne of conjured bone, reviewing reports delivered by undead scribes. He looked up as the Inquisition delegation arrived. "You must be the local authority," Ainz stated calmly. "I have been expecting oversight. Your administrative structure appears hierarchical and bureaucratic. Logical." Vex's hand drifted toward his bolt pistol. "I am Inquisitor Cassius Vex, and by the authority of the God Emperor, I demand you submit to interrogation regarding your nature, origin, and intentions." "Interesting," Ainz replied. "Your God Emperor is referenced frequently in local communications. A central religious and political figure."
I assume, however, I answer to no deity.
I am Ainz Ooal Gown, Sorcerer, King of Nazareth.
"I have no hostile intentions toward your people unless provoked." The psyker stepped forward, closing his eyes. Vex nodded permission. The psyker reached out with his mind, attempting to read Ainz's thoughts, to sense his presence in the warp, to detect chaos taint. The psyker gasped and staggered backward. "There's nothing. He has no presence in the warp, no soul signature, no psychic resonance. He's not a blanks create absence. He doesn't exist to the Imperium at all." "Impossible," Vex growled. "I assure you I exist," Ainz said dryly. "Your colleagues' abilities appear to rely on energy systems I am not connected to. My magic operates on entirely separate principles." The tech priest activated his auspex, scanning Ainz with every sensor available. Biological readings, negative. Radiation signatures, anomalous. Material composition, unknown.
Technological implants, none detected.
Warp contamination, impossible to measure. "This entity does not conform to any known classification," the tech priest intoned through his vox grill. "Xeno's designations insufficient, demon signatures absent, technological origin, inconclusive, recommendation, extreme caution." The sister of battle raised her bolter. "Inquisitor, this thing is an abomination. The God Emperor's light should purge it where it stands." "Lower your weapon, Sister Agatha," Vex commanded, though his own instincts screamed similar conclusions. "We will determine the appropriate response based on evidence, not fear." Ainz watched the exchange with detached interest. These people operated on religious dogma layered over military structure. Efficient in some ways, catastrophically rigid in others. They were afraid of him, yet constrained by their own protocols. "Since my arrival," Ainz began, I have eliminated chaos forces, sealed a warp rift, restored infrastructure, and eliminated all hostile threats within a 100-kilometer radius. Civilian casualties under my administration.
0. Economic disruption minimal. Your people are safer now than they were under your previous government.
You raise the dead, Vex accused. You practice sorcery without sanction. You operate outside the God Emperor's light. These are textbook definitions of heresy. I practice magic that has saved thousands of your citizens, Ainz corrected. I have not requested worship. I have not demanded tribute. I have simply imposed order on chaos. If your doctrine condemns efficiency and survival, then your doctrine is flawed. The Sister of Battle's finger tightened on her trigger. Vex raised a hand to stop her barely. You do not understand the Imperium, Vex said coldly. We have fought for 10,000 years against corruption from within and without. Every exception becomes a doorway. Every compromise feeds the enemy. You may not serve chaos, but you are still an unknown variable in a galaxy where unknowns are extinction events. Then study me, Ainz offered. Test me, observe my methods. You will find I am far more reliable than the forces you typically face. Vex wanted to refuse. Every fiber of his training demanded immediate purging. But he was also a practical man. He had seen the reports. Hydra Cordatus should have been lost. The chaos incursion should have required months of reclamation and centuries of re-sanctification. Instead, it was stable in 3 days. You will submit to continuous monitoring, Vex declared. You will not expand your influence beyond this world without inquisitorial approval. You will not interfere with imperial doctrine or authority, and you will surrender for immediate execution the moment we detect chaos taint. Acceptable, Ainz agreed. Not because he feared them, but because cooperation cost him nothing while he gathered intelligence. The Inquisition established a monitoring station in orbit. Psychers watched constant. Tech priests analyzed every action. Sisters of Battle maintained combat readiness. And Ainz continued stabilizing Hydra Cordatus. He did not preach. He did not recruit. He simply governed with perfect cold efficiency. Undead workers never tired. Supply chains never failed. Crime vanished because punishment was instant and inevitable. Within weeks, Hydra Cordatus became the most stable world in the sector. Other nearby worlds, suffering under chaos raids and orc incursions, began to whisper. What if there was an alternative to endless suffering? What if competence mattered more than faith? What if a ruler could protect without demanding worship? The Inquisition heard these whispers, and they were terrified, because heresy born from chaos could be burned away. But heresy born from hope? That was a fire that might consume the Imperium itself. The warp had been dominant for so long that defeat felt alien. For 10,000 years, chaos had grown. Empires fell. Souls fed the dark gods. The great game continued its eternal cycles. Khorne claimed skulls. Nurgle spread entropy. Sinche wove schemes. Slaanesh harvested excess. Nothing truly threatened them, not the Imperium's corpse god, not the Eldar's dying pantheon, not the Necron's soulless empire. But Ainz Ooal Gown was different. He was spreading. From Hydra Cordatus, his influence crept outward not through conquest, but through appeal. Nearby worlds facing chaos incursions sent desperate pleas. Ainz responded selectively, deploying undead legions to worlds where imperial forces were failing. He did not ask for worship, did not demand conversion. Simply arrived, eliminated threats, stabilized infrastructure, and departed. Every demon he killed stayed dead. Every warp rift he sealed stayed closed. Every cultist he eliminated could not be resurrected. Chaos was not feeding. It was hemorrhaging. In the warp, the four convened an act so rare that reality itself trembled. Their avatars met at the borders of their domains, four impossible presences acknowledging a shared threat. Khorne spoke first, his voice the roar of eternal slaughter. This undead thing offers no glory. Its kills are executions, not battles. It diminishes the harvest. Nurgle's response was the wheeze of collapsing lungs. It cannot be corrupted, cannot decay. It is stagnation incarnate, yet not of my design, an insult to entropy itself. Sinchi's laughter was the sound of shattered plans. I cannot see its future, cannot predict its moves. It exists outside causality as we know it, a blind spot in the great game. Slanesh's voice dripped with frustration. It wants nothing, desires nothing, feels nothing, a void that consumes potential sensation. It is the antithesis of experience. An accord formed fragile, temporary, but absolute. Ainz Ooal Gown must be destroyed. The counteroffensive began across multiple sectors simultaneously. Warp storms intensified.
Demonic incursions doubled.
Chaos warbands that had been fighting each other for centuries unified under a single purpose: find the Sorcerer King and drown him in numbers. The first major assault struck a world called Penthos VII. Ainz had been requested by the local planetary governor, a desperate man who had watched 3 neighboring systems fall to chaos. The Inquisition had not approved the summons, but Ainz came anyway, interested in testing this galaxy's rulers and their decision-making under pressure. He arrived to find a black crusade in progress. Traitor legions descended from the Sky Chaos Space Marines bearing the colors of the Black Legion, World Eaters, Thousand Sons, Emperor's Children.
Cultists by the
Demon princes leading from the front. Greater demons manifesting in swarms.
It should have been overwhelming.
Ainz stood alone on the primary battlefield and began casting tribute to the Black Bounty. Golden light erupted across his allied forces. Every Imperial soldier, every PDF trooper, every civilian defender received instant buffing.
Their strength doubled. Their endurance tripled.
Their weapons struck with supernatural accuracy.
Negative burst.
A wave of entropic energy swept across the chaos forces. Armor corroded.
Flesh withered. Demonic essence destabilized.
Lesser demons dissolved immediately. Greater entities screamed as their forms degraded. A bloodthirster descended directly toward Ainz, axe raised, roaring challenges that shattered stone.
Ainz met its eyes and cast without gesture.
Body of effulgent barrel. His form became crystalline, immune to physical damage. The bloodthirster's axe, capable of splitting tanks, shattered against his body. Before it could react, Ainz touched its chest.
Touch of undeath.
The bloodthirster froze. Its demonic essence inverted, transformed into undead energy. It became a Death Lord under Ainz's command, its immortal rage now directed against its former allies. The chaos forces faltered. A greater demon turned traitor to chaos itself.
Impossible. Ainz raised his staff.
Shub-Niggurath. 20 dark young manifested simultaneously, massive entities that crushed through chaos lines like avalanches of meat and horn. They devoured Chaos Space Marines whole, their armor meaningless against such overwhelming physical force. A sorcerer lord of the Thousand Sons attempted counter-magic, weaving warp spells designed to unravel enemy enchantments. Anti simply activated anti-magic field, and every warp-based spell within 300 meters ceased functioning. Demons blinked out of existence.
Sorcerers found their powers silent.
Possessed warriors collapsed as the entities within were severed from their hosts. The battle lasted 4 hours. By its end, the chaos invasion was annihilated.
Not defeated, annihilated. No survival. No retreat. No glorious last stand. Just erasure. Across the sector, similar scenes repeated.
Ainz could not be everywhere, but he did not need to be. He began teaching select Imperial commanders his basic tactics. Not magic, they could not replicate that, but strategy.
How to recognize chaos patterns.
How to exploit demon vulnerabilities. How to prioritize targets. Imperial forces that adopted his methods saw survival rates increase by magnitudes. The Inquisition watched with growing horror. He was becoming influential not through heresy, but through competence. In the warp, the Chaos Gods convened again. He must be drawn into a trap, Sinch hissed. Somewhere we control absolutely. A demon world, Nurgle suggested. Where reality itself is ours. He will not come willingly, Khorne growled. Then we take what he values, Slaanesh whispered. His servants, his pride, his control. They reached into real space, searching for leverage.
But Ainz had no loved ones here. No companions. No emotional attachment.
His guardians remained in another universe entirely. He was invulnerable to hostage-taking because he cared for nothing in this galaxy.
Frustrated, chaos escalated. Entire systems were drowned in warp storm. Demon Primarchs stirred from their slumber.
The Cicatrix Maledictum pulsed with renewed fury.
And Ainz adapted.
He began venturing into the warp itself, not defensively, but offensively. He identified warp routes used by chaos fleets and collapsed them with magic. He located demon strongholds and erased them with surgical precision. He treated the Imperium not as hell, but as hostile territory to be conquered. For the first time since the War in Heaven, the warp was retreating. Sectors that had been contested for millennia fell silent. Demon incursions stopped. Chaos cults found their prayers unanswered. The warp itself grew colder in regions where Ainz operated, not quieter, but frozen, as though undeath's chill was spreading through the fabric of the Imperium. The chaos gods felt something they had not experienced in eons.
Fear.
Not of defeat in battle.
Not of temporary setback.
Fear of obsolescence. Fear that suffering might be optional. Fear that tyranny could be more absolute than chaos. And in the Imperium, Ainz Ooal Gown continued his work, indifferent to the cosmic terror he inspired. He had a mission: stabilize this region, gather intelligence, find a way home. Everything else was just obstacles to be eliminated. Efficiently.
Permanently.
They came from the sky like falling stars. Drop pods crashed into the surface of Penthos VII with precision that bordered on supernatural. Within seconds, warriors emerged 8 feet tall, clad in ceramite that had turned aside tank rounds, bearing weapons that could level buildings. Space Marines of the Ultramarines chapter, led by Captain Titus Marcellus. The Imperium's finest warriors had come to assess the Sorcerer King. Behind them, shadowed and silent, came reinforcements: Grey Knights, the Demon Slayers. Warriors whose every breath was a prayer, whose armor was warded against chaos itself. They had heard impossible reports. A being that killed demons permanently, that walked the warp and emerged unscathed, that commanded the dead with perfect authority. They came to determine if he was humanity's salvation or its next extinction event. Ainz stood in the ruins of a chaos fortress, surrounded by his undead servants. He sensed the new arrivals immediately. Their life signatures were anomalous, far beyond normal humans.
Enhanced, armored,
dangerous. Captain Marcellus approached with weapons lowered but ready. I am Captain Titus Marcellus of the Ultramarines. You are the one called Ainz Ooal Gown? I am, Ainz replied, his empty gaze assessing the warriors before him.
You are enhanced soldiers. Posthuman. Interesting genetic and cybernetic integration.
We are the Emperor's Angels of Death, Marcellus stated. We have come to determine your nature and threat level. And if you determine I am a threat, then we will eliminate you. Ainz nodded slowly. Honest.
Efficient. I appreciate direct.
However, I have no intention of submitting to your judgment. I have committed no crimes against your people. I have saved multiple worlds from annihilation. Your suspicion, while understandable, is not grounds for aggression. A Grey Knight stepped forward, his armor inscribed with protective wards, his voice resonating with psychic authority. You wield sorcery without sanction.
You traffic with the dead. You exist outside the Emperor's light.
These are heresies worthy of death. Your theology is not my concern, Ainz replied calmly. I will defend myself if attacked. I suggest you reconsider your approach. Marcellus raised a hand, halting the Grey Knight. We are not here to execute you without cause.
But we will test. Prove your intentions are as you claim. How do you propose to test me? Ainz asked. Combat, Marcellus states.
You claim to fight chaos effectively.
Show us.
Ainz considered. These warriors were proud, zealous, and clearly accustomed to victory. Refusing would appear cowardly. Accepting might provide valuable intelligence on this galaxy's elite forces. Very well, Ainz agreed. A controlled engagement. No lethal force unless you escalate.
Agreed? Marcellus hesitated, then nodded.
Agreed. The battlefield was cleared. Space Marines formed a perimeter. Bolters trained on Ainz. The Grey Knights watched with psychic senses extended, monitoring for chaos taint. Marcellus drew his power sword, its blade crackling with energy. Begin when ready. Ainz cast instantly. Triple maximize magic, explode mine. The ground beneath Marcellus erupted with force equivalent to heavy artillery. The captain was launched backward, his armor shields absorbing most of the impact but still registering critical damage. Before he could recover, Ainz followed up.
Delay magic. True death.
A dark bolt streaked toward Marcellus, but Ainz had configured it to trigger delayed, giving the warrior time to dodge. Marcellus rolled aside with superhuman speed, the spell impacting where he had been and leaving a crater of absolute disintegration. Marcellus attacked,
Closing distance with shocking speed.
His power sword struck Ainz's passive defense's magical barriers that absorbed the blow. Sparks flew. The blade, capable of cutting through tank armor, failed to penetrate. Ainz retaliated with magic arrow, summoning dozens of force projectiles that homed in on Marcellus from every angle. The captain's armor took the hits, each impact registering but not penetrating. They clashed for 3 minutes, Marcellus demonstrating centuries of combat experience. Ainz showcasing magical versatility that defied Imperial understanding. Neither could gain decisive advantage. Marcellus's combat prowess was extraordinary. Ainz's magical arsenal was inexhaustible. Finally, Ainz called a halt.
Suffisi. You are skilled warriors. Impressive by any standard.
Marcellus lowered his blade, breathing heavily despite his enhanced physiology. You fight like no sorcerer I have encountered.
No chaos corruption.
No warp taint. Just power. Controlled and absolute. A Grey Knight approached, scanning Ainz with psychic senses. He is telling the truth. There is no chaos within him. No demon pact.
No corruption.
He is
clean. Impossibly he is clean.
Marcellus removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face marked by decades of warfare. I have fought demons, traitors, Xenos.
I have seen the galaxy's horrors. You are unlike any of them.
Because I am not from this galaxy, Ainz stated plainly. I come from another reality, transported here by accident. I have no allegiance to your Imperium, but no hostility either. I simply seek stability in this region while I search for a way home.
And if you find no way home? Marcellus pressed. Then I will continue doing what I do best, imposing order on chaos.
The Space Marines exchanged glances. This was not the answer they wanted, but it was honest. Ainz had demonstrated power that rivaled greater demons,
yet showed restraint. He had saved Imperial world without madness. He was dangerous.
But so was everything else in the galaxy. The difference was that Ainz was predictable. Marcellus made a decision. I will report to my chapter master that you are a potential ally, not an enemy. But know this: if you ever turn against humanity, we will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy. Noted, Ainz replied. However, I have no interest in conquest here.
Only survival and research.
The Space Marines withdrew, leaving Ainz alone once more. They returned to their ships and transmitted reports that would echo through the highest levels of Imperial command. A new power had emerged, not chaos.
Not Xenos. Something else entirely.
The Imperium faced a question it had no doctrine to answer. What do you do with a tyrant who only wants to be left alone,
but refuses to kneel?
The world was called Tertian VIII, and the Inquisition had declared it lost. Chaos corruption had spread too deeply. The population had been tainted. Mutation rates exceeded acceptable levels. Standard protocol demanded exterminatus, total planetary annihilation, to prevent further spread. Ainz had arrived 2 weeks earlier, responding to a desperate astropathic cry before the Inquisition's judgment was finalized. He found a world on the brink.
Not yet fallen. Chaos cultists controlled 3 continents,
manifested nightly. But billions of loyal Imperial citizens remained, huddled in hive cities,
fighting street by street. The Inquisition wanted to kill them all. Ainz disagreed. Zones. Cultists were hunted.
Demons were managed purple.
Chaos presence had been reduced by 70%. Then the inquisitorial fleet arrived. Inquisitor Lord Erasmus Chiral commanded the Purge Fleet 5 capital ships, each carrying cyclonic torpedoes capable of cracking continents. He had condemned 40 worlds over his career without hesitation. Tertian VIII would be number 41. His fleet entered orbit and immediately detected anomalous readings. The chaos signatures that had justified exterminatus were diminishing rapidly, Chiral's astropath reported. My lord, there are reports from the surface. The chaos incursion is being suppressed.
By the Sorcerer King, Chiral growled. He had read the
Lords dismissed them as exaggerations.
No single entity could undo a planetary-scale chaos infection. Yet the data was undeniable. Chiral opened a Vox channel to the surface. This is Inquisitor Lord Erasmus Chiral to the entity known as Ainz Ooal Gown. You are operating without sanction on a world condemned by the Holy Ordos. Withdraw immediately. Ainz's response came through clearly, calm and clinical. I will not withdraw. This world can be saved. Exterminatus is unnecessary and wasteful. That is not your judgment to make. And yet my judgment has proven accurate, Ainz replied. Chaos presence has been reduced to manageable levels.
civilian casualties have been minimized.
Your solution would kill 8 billion loyal Imperial citizens along with the infected.
Inefficient.
Chiral's rage boiled over. You dare lecture me on efficiency? I have purged worlds to save sectors.
I have made choices that would shatter lesser men.
The Imperium survives because we do not hesitate when mercy becomes weakness. Your doctrine confuses cruelty with necessity, Ainz stated. This world can be cleansed without total annihilation.
I am proving it as we speak.
Then you are a fool, Chiral declared. Chaos corruption is insidious.
What appears clean today may be festering beneath. We cannot take that risk.
You mean you refuse to do the difficult work of proper investigation, Ainz corrected. It is easier to destroy than to save. I expected more competence from an institution that claims 10 millennia of experience. Silence hung on the Vox for 3 full seconds. You have 1 hour to evacuate, Chiral stated coldly. After that, this world burns. The transmission cut. Ainz stood on the surface, surrounded by his death knights and undead magistrates. He could easily teleport to another world.
Continue his work elsewhere, but that would doom 8 billion people whose only crime was being inconvenient to Imperial doctrine.
He made his decision.
Prepare defensive barriers.
Priority targets. Orbital bombardment trajectories. Secondary objective, evacuation of critical population centers to underground shelters. His undead forces mobilized instantly, perfect coordination across 3 continents. 53 minutes later, the first cyclonic torpedo launched. Ainz detected it immediately with his divination spells. He calculated its trajectory, velocity, payload yield. Then he teleported directly into its path. 200 kilometers above the surface.
He appeared beside the descending warhead. He cast without hesitation. Perfect unknowable.
The torpedo disappeared, not destroyed, but transported into a pocket dimension of Ainz's creation. Removed from reality entirely, it would detonate harmlessly in the void between spaces. In orbit, Chiral watched his munitions display.
Torpedo 1, transmission lost. Status unknown.
Launch torpedo 2 through 6, he commanded. Full spread pattern. 6 warheads descended. Ainz dealt with them methodically. Teleport. Pocket dimension. Repeat. Each warhead removed before it could strike atmosphere. Chiral's face drained of color.
What? How? In mid-flight. That's impossible.
So were the reports about him permanently killing demons, my lord.
Yet here we are.
Chiral's hand hovered over the main battery controls. Ship-scale lances and macro cannons, capable of glassing continents. But using them meant exposing his fleet to longer engagement times, allowing that thing to potentially counterattack. A new transmission arrived, this time from Tertian VIII planetary governor.
Lord Inquisitor, please. The Sorcerer King has saved us. Chaos is retreating. We still have loyalty.
We still serve the Emperor. Please, do not condemn us for crimes we did not commit. Behind the governor's voice, Cairo could hear thousands more civilians, soldiers, priests, all begging for mercy. He had never hesitated before. He had never needed to. But he had never faced someone who made his absolute solutions look like cowardice. Ainz's voice cut through the vox. Inquisitor Cairo, you have a choice. Withdraw. Allow me to complete the purge properly and save 8 billion Imperial citizens. Or continue this bombardment, which I will continue to neutralize while documenting your willingness to murder loyal subjects rather than admit your protocols are flawed. You dare threaten me? I threaten no one, Ainz replied. I am stating facts. Your exterminatus will fail. Your reputation will suffer. Your doctrine will be questioned. Or you can leave, allow success to speak for itself, and take partial credit for the world's salvation through your strategic restraint. Cairo sat in his command throne, surrounded by crew members who no longer looked at him with unquestioning loyalty. He had been outmaneuvered, not militarily, politically. If he withdrew, he admitted the Sorcerer King was right. If he continued, he became the villain who would rather see billions die than admit error. Cease bombardment, Cairo ordered quietly. We will observe from orbit. For now, the fleet held position but did not fire. On Tertian VIII, the population wept with relief, and Ainz Ooal Gown continued his work, methodical and unstoppable, proving with every action that the Imperium's cruelty was habit, not necessity. Across the sector, word spread. The Sorcerer King had stared down an exterminatus, and won without firing a shot. Ainz had gathered enough intelligence. He understood the warp now not completely, but sufficiently. It was a dimension of emotion and thought, where souls and belief held physical weight. Demons were not creatures but concepts given form. The chaos gods were not entities but collective manifestations of mortal sin. And like any system, it could be exploited. He stood at the edge of a stable warp rift in the Orpheus sector, one that had existed for 3 centuries, feeding demons into real space continuously. The Imperium had long given up trying to close it, settling for containment instead.
Ainz intended to do better. He began casting layering spells.
Widen magic, anti-information wall, creating a barrier that severed the rift's connection to the emotions that sustained it. Second, drown magic, reality slash, cutting through dimensional fabric at the rift's foundation. Third, triplet maximize magic, dimensional lock, sealing the wound permanently. The rift screamed. Demons poured through in desperate final surge, sensing their doorway closing. Ainz met them with Vermilion Nova, a wave of absolute destruction that erased the demonic horde before they traveled 10 meters. The rift collapsed, not suppressed, not contained, closed, permanently, within the warp. The chaos gods felt the wound. Another entry point, lost, not temporarily, forever. Ainz moved to the next rift, then the next. Across the sector, he began a systematic campaign identifying warp breaches, sealing them with magic the Imperium could not counter. He worked alone, requiring no support, no logistics, no prayer.
Just method.
Just will. The Imperium watched in disbelief. Warp rifts that had terrorized sectors for millennia were
vanishing. Chaos incursions dried up.
Demon manifestations dropped to record low.
But Ainz was not content with defense. He had learned something crucial. The warp, despite its chaos, followed rules. Demons required emotional resonance to manifest. Warp storms fed on fear and despair. Chaos corruption spread through belief and contact. Remove those elements, and chaos became impotent. Ainz launched his first offensive into the warp itself.
He did not enter randomly. He identified it.
Stronghold, a fortress of brass and rage within Khorne's domain, where demons gathered before deploying to real space. He opened a portal with gate and stepped through, surrounded by an undead honor guard. The blood god's domain roared fury. Bloodletters charged by the thousands. Bloodthirsters descended like meteors. The very ground screamed rage. Ainz activated. The goal of all life is death, and followed with Shub Niggurath. The dark young that manifested were empowered beyond anything Ainz had summoned before, each one capable of battling a greater demon. They tore into the coronate horde with mindless efficiency, and because Ainz's magic operated outside the warp's rules, every demon destroyed stayed destroyed. Khorne himself turned attention toward the intrusion, a presence so vast it could crush stars with focused will. His rage descended like an avalanche of pure hatred. Ainz met it with
perfect warrior
transformation, temporarily amplifying his combat capabilities, and activated every defensive buff in his arsenal. The blood god's fury crashed against him like an ocean against a cliff. And held, Ainz was not brave. He was not glorious. He was simply immovable. Khorne tried to corrupt him, rage would not take hold. Tried to crush him, defensive magic absorb the force. Tried to banish him, he was not summoned.
thus could not be unsummoned. The blood god withdrew, frustrated and confused.
Ainz destroyed the brass fortress methodically, leaving no structure intact,
and returned to real. They repeated the tactic across multiple chaos domains.
Control undead.
On plague zombies they obeyed him perfectly. Immune to their own diseases, he turned Nurgle's own servants against demon positions, then sealed the region with death magic that prevented regeneration. In Tassencha's maze he used paranormal intuition to navigate impossible geometries, followed by explode mine, to demolish crystallized fate structures. Xin Chi tried to trap him in recursive time loops. Saints simply cast time accelerator and broke the cycles through brute temporal force. In Slaaneash's palace, he ignored every temptation. His undead nature rendered him immune to pleasure, pain,
excess.
He walked through chambers designed to break minds and emerged unmoved, then collapsed the domain's foundations with
earthquake and reality slash.
The warp was bleeding territory. For the first time since the fall of the Eldar, chaos was retreating, not temporarily, but structurally. Regions of the Imperium went quiet, cold, frozen under undeath's influence. The warp storms surrounding contested sectors diminished. The cicatrix maledictum itself, the great rift tearing the Imperium in half, began to narrow at its edges where Ainz operated. In real space, Imperial commanders witnessed miracles they had no theological framework to explain. Worlds that had been cut off by warp storms for decades suddenly reconnected. Chaos fleets found their warp routes collapsing, stranding them in real space where Imperial Navy could engage normally. Demon manifestations became rare rather than routine, and Ainz continued his work, indifferent to the cosmic significance. He was not humanity's savior. He was not the Emperor's champion. He was simply a problem solver who had identified chaos as the primary obstacle to stability in this region. So he was removing it.
Methodically, permanently.
In the eye of terror, Abaddon the Despoiler watched his latest Black Crusade falter. Warp routes he had relied on for millennia were vanishing. Demon allies were not responding to summons. Lesser cultists whispered that the gods themselves were retreating.
Who is this sorcerer king? Abaddon demanded of his sorcerers.
They had no answer that made sense. A Necron weapon? No, he wielded magic, not technology. An Eldar plot? No, his methods were too direct, too brutal. A lost Primarch? No, he bore no resemblance to the Emperor's sons. He was simply anomalous. A variable from outside the equation, and he was winning a war chaos thought unwinnable. The Chaos Gods convened for the final time regarding Ainz Ooal Gown. We cannot kill him, Khorne admitted, rage burning. We cannot corrupt him, Nurgle wheezed. We cannot predict him, Tsinch hissed. We cannot tempt him, Slaanesh whispered. Silence fell across the warp. Then we ignore him, Tsinti finally declared. We withdraw from sectors he operates in. We focus elsewhere. Let the material realm have its cold tyrant. The galaxy is vast. We have eternity. It was not victory. It was not even stalemate. It was chaos retreating for the first time in history. And in real space, Ainz Ooal Gown stood alone, surrounded by the ruins of demon fortresses, and planned his next move. He still needed to find a way home. But until then, he would continue doing what he did best.
Imposing order on hell itself. They called it the Silent Sector.
A region within the Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the galaxy cut off by the Cicatrix Maledictum.
17 systems, 41 inhabited worlds, billions of souls, and perfect, terrible stability.
Ainz Ooal Gown ruled here not as conqueror, but as administrator.
He did not demand worship, did not erect monuments,
did not extract tithes beyond what was necessary for basic function. He simply governed with cold, absolute efficiency. Chaos could not enter. Warp rifts were sealed permanently.
Demon incursions were impossible.
Orc invasions were annihilated before reaching populated worlds. Tyrannid splinter fleets were hunted systematically. Every threat was identified, analyzed, and eliminated with methodical precision. The citizens lived in safety unknown elsewhere in the Imperium. But they did not celebrate. There was no joy here.
No hope.
No faith.
Just order.
The undead patrolled streets eternally. Crime was non-existent because punishment was instant.
Rebellion was impossible because surveillance was total.
Prayer to the God Emperor was not forbidden, but it felt hollow when another power so clearly maintained control. Commissar Helena Vorst, who had witnessed Ainz's first arrival on Hydra Cordatus, now served as liaison between his administration and the surviving Imperial officials. She walked through the capital city of his primary world, observing citizens going about their lives. They were not unhappy. Not really. They had food,
Medicine,
safety,
education,
opportunities, but they were not inspired. They lived as citizens of an empire whose ruler did not love them, did not need them, did not even particularly care about them beyond their utility. It was stability without soul. Helena entered the administrative palace, a structure of functional design, devoid of imperial Gothic grandeur or chaos corruption. Just efficient architecture serving purpose. Ainz sat on his throne of conjured bone, reviewing reports delivered by undead scribes. He looked up as Helena approached.
Commissar Vorst, your scheduled report?
The outer colonies are secure, my lord. Food production exceeds projected requirements by 12%. No security incidents this quarter. Satisfactory.
Auntie's empty gaze studied her. You seem troubled.
Helena hesitated. In 3 years under his rule, she had never seen him punish honesty. May I speak freely? Always. You have saved us, Helena began carefully. Chaos is gone, suffering has ended. We are safer than we have ever been, but we do not feel saved.
Ainz tilted his head slightly. Explain. The Imperium, for all its cruelty, gave us purpose, faith, the belief that our suffering meant something, that the God Emperor loved us,
that our sacrifices mattered. Helena's voice grew quieter. You have removed the suffering, but you have not replaced the meaning. Meaning is a luxury, Ainz replied. Survival is fundamental. You are alive. Your children will grow up without watching demons eat their neighbors. That should be sufficient. Should be, Helena agreed. But humans are not logical, my lord. We need more than safety. We need something to believe in. Ainz considered this silently. He understood intellectually Satoru Suzuki had lived a life devoid of meaning. Trapped in corporate drudgery, finding purpose only in a game that no longer existed. But his undead nature suppressed such emotions now. He could analyze meaning, but he could not feel its absence. I am not your savior, Ainz finally stated. I am not your god. I am simply a ruler who maintains order. If you require faith, look elsewhere. I will not provide comforting lies. I know, Helena said. And that is why, despite everything, some whisper that you are worse than chaos. Ainz's eye sockets flared briefly with crimson light.
Explain that statement.
Chaos destroys hope, but it offers something in return: power, pleasure, glory.
Revenge. You offer nothing but existence. Life without her.
Safety without joy. You prove that suffering is optional, but you also prove that salvation can be hollow.
Silence filled the chamber.
Do you wish me to leave? Ainz asked quietly. Helena's eyes widened. What? If my presence destroys your spirit, I can withdraw. Rule yourselves. Face chaos alone again. I am not invested in your gratitude. No, Helena blurted, then composed herself. No, my lord, please, we do need you. It is just complicated. Then adapt, Ainz stated. I will continue stabilizing this region. I will continue eliminating threats. I will continue providing the safety your Imperium cannot. What you do with that safety, whether you find meaning or wither in comfort, is not my concern. Helena saluted and withdrew. Outside, she looked up at the clear sky. No warp storms, no demonic manifestations, just stars. Beautiful and cold. Somewhere in the wider galaxy, the Imperium still fought its endless war. The God Emperor still sat on his golden throne. Chaos still corrupt. Hope still struggled against despair. But here, in the silent sector, there was only order. Perfect, absolute, terrible order. Maintained by a tyrant who asked nothing and gave everything except the one thing humans needed most. A reason to live beyond mere survival. Ainz Ooal Gown ruled his silent kingdom, still searching for a way home, still indifferent to worship, still unopposed because no force in this galaxy could remove him. He had proven suffering was optional, and in doing so, created a new kind of despair. The despair of purpose lost. The nightmare of a perfect prison. A Grimdark galaxy's ultimate irony, that salvation could feel like damnation. And tyranny could be efficient, benevolent, and absolutely horrifying.